This is what we are. We are.
Well, thank you, Joana.
Thank you.
And
that was amazing.
How should we start? Do you know these are my moderator notes, and I told them I'm going to do a no moderation. So this is like freestyle panel.
We already started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We started the conversation already.
So I will start with a very simple but I think important question that was kind of present in all of your talks, and then from there we'll let it flow. What is an algorithm?
Wow.
Next.
I already had that one in the morning.
So an algorithm is pretty much a computational system that allows you to take an input and transform that into an output. Now, what's interesting about algorithms is that they're deeply political. And maybe to circle back on everyone's talk here, there's this belief that data is absolute truth because it's numbers. So it feels like very concrete. So people put a lot of trust in data. But turns out, when you collect data, you store data, you process data, you visualize data, and then you read data, all those steps include so many ideological biases that will transform the signal in a way that's I won't be able to pronounce that word, you get the idea. It's not reversible. Yeah, data is deeply political, and I think in our society, if we want to have a mature conversation about information, we need to realize that a bit more. That's my super long answer.
Well, yes, I mean, I usually think of algorithms in terms of recipes for something. If I want to explain it to a person in the street, I would compare this to cooking a cake, but then say online somehow we got to do that complexity of data that algorithms, they are not explainable in Excel sheets, and they're not explainable by simple step after step way of explaining how we would actually expect them to be explainable. Yes, you add this to this to this, and you have that result. No, in the machine learning environment with the neuronal networks learning things without control, we are not able to explain how those recipes for human beings, for understanding human beings work, how absurd the results we get are or not. Because I think my problem with them basically is that we are always in the lost position. Even if they are wrong, we are in lost position because we get judged on the basis of ridiculous analysis behind the screen that we cannot audit. If they get it right, we also lose as human beings because we are controlled and somebody is able to predict as well. So both ways we have problem with them. And I think, I'm not saying we should make it forbidden, but certainly this is an area of technology where we need far more accountability than it gets now.
There is, I mean, just to elaborate on that, there is, I'm not sure if some of you know, it's something that's called Apply Magic Sauce. It's, if you Google it, again,
you can find it online.
It's a website that is the software that was developed in Cambridge, and I guess used by Cambridge Analytica and so on, that gives you your psychometric profile based on your Facebook likes and on your tweets. So I think it's worth it to take a chance because you understand how you're being profiled and how absurd the whole thing is, as Katarzyna said.
When I attack this, because so happens that it's been designed by a Polish researcher now working in the US, so it's not that company, yes? It's another researcher who started, it's Michał Kosinski.
University.
Yeah, exactly,
yeah,
it's a university. So when I attack him on this, he says, well, we just trained our algorithms in English. So that's why we have absurd results for Polish people. But maybe if you are native speakers in English, you will get something more interesting than I got. But
interesting.
Anyway, if we move beyond, that's like a, that test you mentioned, it's just a toy. It's just a showcase. What they really have on us, I mean, those companies we are discussing, the power today, I'm afraid is far more correct, far more accurate than this little test. So let's not comfort ourselves that it's just ridiculous. I think it can be quite effective, actually, the targeting.
And Joana, aside from being a brilliant artist researcher,
Thank you.
curious human being, you're also, not long ago, you became a mother.
Oh, yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
she's beautiful. You need to
Just
play
the
with her.
screamings that you heard, it's her.
Yeah. But the question is, so very soon she's going to be a kid interacting with all of this. How do you plan to explain her what is an algorithm?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because he was already targeted before she was born. I mean, I never mentioned anything about my pregnancy on social networks or on anything, and even I tried to avoid speaking on it in WhatsApp or everything. But even with that, I just got babies advertising and stuff that I had to buy. And well, as Katarzyna said, like it's quite far more precise than we can acknowledge. It's very tough. I mean, yeah, I don't know, because we are using screens and we are using apps, even though we are criticizing them, and it's part of the game because we need to understand how they work. And I don't know. It's
we can leave the question open.
yeah.
I'm sure we can crowdsource a good answer, but my intention is kind of take it into this big concept of literacy and how it has been limited so far to the idea of reading and writing, and now there's a little bit more conversation around the concept of digital literacy, but there's also media literacy, technological literacy, and just to put a provocation in this virtual, invisible table that we are sharing. Why are we required in most countries to get a driver license to be able to not only use a car, but get out to a very complex system of roads and all of that, but then nobody needs a driver license to use a smartphone and use this, all of these apps and the networks and all of these. So,
I think it's a very good point, actually.
Yeah.
I was about to disagree with you, but you made a very convincing point that we, in general, should be more educated about the use we make of the internet, for instance, or technologies in general. That being said, I think I'm not too much for the idea of putting the blame on people, because I think life is, it's pretty complicated. Right? There's a lot going on, and people are constantly, pressured to do a lot of things and like make a living and engage in their communities and trying to just get by, and that's plenty. I think we need to design systems that are open enough that they leave you with better transparency. So I guess it's more about adapting the systems to be people-friendly enough. And I'm not talking about user experience here. I'm really talking about, people-friendly enough and just open about their intents. Rather than trying to put the blame on people and calling them narcissists, whatever, leave the people alone. Let them live their lives and try to design systems that are more humane and support humanity in people rather than trying to enforce some sort of standards that are inaccessible for most vulnerable communities. Because as soon as you put regulations that put pressures on people, you can be absolutely sure that some communities will be cut out access from those fields, which would be very sad.
Yeah, I strongly agree. In fact, at Panopticon, when we do the work I described, we try to pressure regulators, also work with people. We never put separation between those two tactics. I think one does not exist without another. So, I mean, we cannot work for better laws, then get better laws, regulating something that people have no idea that it was problematic in the first place, because then we become the ridiculous ones who complicate people's lives. So first we need to create a problem, so reveal the invisible. I really love your project on revealing the targeted advertising ecosystem. I tried it myself in one simple infographic and it failed. I mean, it was too complicated and yeah, it has to move and it has to show the complexity. So, it's our work to reveal the problems first, but we cannot stop here. We cannot leave people with those problems and say, now you fix them yourselves, because nobody, and as individual, will be able to confront those very complex systems. And here comes regulation. And that is a never-ending story again. I mean, life changes, internet changes, technology changes. We also need improved rules. But for those things, we had sound rules. It's not like the law is really behind. No, I mean, certain rules that you cannot be tracked or your privacy cannot be invaded without a good reason has been there for 20 years. Nothing changed in this rule. Technology is changing, the challenges are growing, but the rule holds. So if we get the rules right, and if we get enforcement right, so unfortunately, I guess we are talking about high fines, financial penalties for companies, there is nothing else that works. And Zuckerberg confirmed that you know, unless he's fined, he doesn't even know that there was some kind of process, legal process. So then we probably can get a nice balance here.
And taking it from there, you mentioned something, a concept that I feel is a very good link to the idea of the subversion of paradoxes, because your projects are clearly subversive, and it is the idea of invisible infrastructures, where it is not necessarily, it's like this kind of contradiction or paradox that the infrastructure is not invisible. It's a lot of physicality in these things that we name as clouds and social networks. So it's actually infrastructures that those who use them want them to be perceived as invisible.
I'm not sure if that's like something that's planned or something that's being exploited. You know, in a way that, yeah, internet, yeah, well, you know, you have, well, this idea of the cloud, that's something ethereal, that it doesn't smell, it doesn't taste, you can't touch it, and it's up in the skies. No, well, it's down, it's super physical, it's huge, and it's quite nasty. The internet infrastructures are raw, and they are gray, and they're dirty, and so I think that, I guess, it was built in a way that it should be just safe and efficient and blah, blah, but I think that this idea, it's being exploited by very different actors in order to take the most out of its users. Yeah, I think, yeah. But I don't think it's something that it was planned to be that way, because the beginning of the internet wasn't that way. It wasn't planned to be that way. Yeah, it's cookies appeared in '94, and then, well, the story was, yeah.
Yeah, and Dan was mentioning yesterday that this Monday is kind of an important day to celebrate that decision that Tim Berners-Lee made. But talking about the materiality, I'll pass the ball to Ian. In our previous Skype call, previous to this event, you were mentioning this idea of understanding all these platforms through architecture and the Bauhaus. Can you talk us a little bit about that?
Of course. So something I try to think a lot about these days, but I'm no expert at all, so everyone can do their research and be a lot better than I am on this subject, but I'm reading a lot of books by Jane Jacobs, who's this urban planner who was also an activist in the 1960s, and she was fighting against the redevelopment of real estate and urban planning in New York at the time, especially against one man whose name was Robert Moses, who was planning on putting highways all over the city, which would have, you know, split neighborhoods and destroyed communities in many different ways. And what's interesting is that Jane Jacobs is fighting against the modernist architects who, like, for instance, Le Corbusier in France, who were designing those utopian cities in which the architect is not only designing the space in which we live, but also design the ways people are meant to interact within the space. So, like, they kind of set aside any kind of agency for the people. It's really amazing architecture if you don't have any idea on your own. And really, when you think about this, you realize that that sounds pretty much like Facebook, you know, or Twitter, or whatever other social media platform, where all interactions between users are so curated and contrived and, like, limited in ways that make them absolutely inhuman. I think, you know, the same way we're trying to build cities that are supporting communities that build their own initiatives from the ground up, we need to let people do the same thing online. If we try to consider those spaces as spaces instead of just like tools. Or
Yeah, it's really optimistic for me to see that even in our legal digital rights bubble, year after year, the conversation about new way of dealing with monopolies, online monopolies, is more serious. So this year, for the first time, I've heard people from New America Foundation even discussing it. So, you know, it's conservatives, it's left-wing people, everybody sees the same problem, that we ended up having communication infrastructure being monopolized and shaped the way we never chose. And again, it's not to punish those companies for being inventive and for investing money in the right thing in the right time, but right now we have to rethink the way we will use it without punishing them. I have nothing against those companies making profit in an ethical way, but how about opening those infrastructures for free interactions with other systems, the way we call our phones? You know, even, again, Facebook is coming up a lot these days, but they deserve it. You know, they already separated Messenger from the platform. They already proved the point that all those functions can be seen as separate channels of communication. Technically speaking, there is nothing blocking interoperability here, yes? And us being able to connect to Twitter, Facebook, Google, whatever there is for communication purposes, the same way we call our phones or we use our phones as hardware. So thinking that this might be the future of those infrastructures, not destroying them, not thinking that they are evil, but rebuilding them in an organic, grassroots way, the way that they will enable different kind of being together, maybe finally being together and creating and not just networking or, you know, like Tindering or whatever there is.
There is also something that I think we should add in terms of infrastructure and how powerful like Facebook, Google, and all these companies are becoming, is that they're building their own infrastructure, meaning that they are throwing their own cables to transport information. And now there is a Facebook, together with Microsoft, I think, and Telefonica, that just built this massive submarine cable that it goes from Virginia in the US to Bilbao, here north of Spain. And it's going to be the biggest cable in the world, biggest in terms of being able to carry a huge amount of information. Yeah, and this is going to be controlled by Facebook, Microsoft, and Telefonica. And Google is doing same things. I think it's something from the US, the West Coast to Japan, and some cable in the inland in Brazil, something like that. Yeah, and that's something that, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, and this is a question for you also, can I?
Of course.
Even though there is a lot of policy on data use and so on, if those companies are retaining control of the physical infrastructures that transport information, how much you can affect on that? You know, that's something, because I think that those things are being really out of the public eye, and that's something that really matters at the end.
It's a new information for me that it's private investment these days. I guess I had this image that it's similar to telecoms, where it has been treated as public good a long time ago. So I can only hope and assume that the same trend will follow here. So whenever we talk about physical infrastructure, it's kind of easier than if we talk about those software-based infrastructures. But you never know. I mean, if, I don't know, high-frequency trading between stock markets happens partly because physical infrastructure being built through cities by private stock markets, maybe, and nobody cares that maybe New York City suffers some kind of harm because of this cable, we might be actually witnessing a new era of intrusions, physical intrusions in our states, in our cities, in our physical life because of the power of the capital here. So I guess it's just another challenge. But legally speaking, treating cable as something that must be shared is not complicated. We've done that with telecoms. We can do this again with internet companies.
So because of time, I can imagine that there are loads of interesting questions in the room, but because of time, we'll need to have those questions happening in the breaks.
Non-working breaks.
Sorry?
Non-working breaks.
In the not-working breaks. And also, I guess you two are going to be on Sunday around?
Yes, I'm staying for the
I don't
workshop.
know, because
Well, maybe
you can go to Alisaba and we can continue a little bit of this. But before closing, I wanted each of you to share with this amazing audience one action. What can we, you know, what is this kind of takeaway that's something that we can do today, tomorrow, very, very kind of concrete action to empower us and others.
Use Tor, use Signal. I know it's super cliche, but tell your friends about encryption. It's really, it's a super easy thing. And just inform yourself about those things because not all solutions work for everyone in every use case. But, encryption only works if everyone uses it. And an app like Signal, for instance, has a great user experience that's very similar to the one of Messenger or WhatsApp. So I feel like that's a super easy thing to do. You just go to the App Store, download that, and you're already making a tremendous difference if you manage to convince a couple of your friends of using it. It's a small thing. So.
True. I would say try to say no to third-party tracking in the advertising ecosystem. It's not very complicated. It's setting your browser settings to no. So do not track me, one thing, but also now these days, especially in Europe, the advertising industry itself self-regulated and offers online. There is an app, like a website where you can go and withdraw your consent to third-party tracking. So if you, again, Google advertising and consent or online choices, you will find this place where you can simply say no to being tracked by most of the official data brokers, at least that.
And I would just say, in the physical part, which is my part, just support community networks. I don't know if you are aware what community networks are. You can Google it, all the things, okay? But here in Spain, we have Gifinet. In Catalonia, we have Gifinet, which is the biggest community network, and it's something that's really, really worth looking at it. Yeah, it means it's open, transparent, and no hierarchical networks. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so I will invite you later just to share the links on the WhatsApp group so that we can all do it. And thanks a lot for this amazing start of the day. Big applause for our guests.
Thank you.
In randomness, we trust.